This is the sermon for Maundy Thursday, 2022, April 14th. And Maundy Thursday is the church recognition of Jesus' Last Supper with the disciples. And it happened at the beginning of Passover. So I'll read from Luke 14 through 30. When it was time, Jesus sat down, all the apostles with him, and said, "You've no idea how much I've looked forward to eating this Passover meal with you before I enter my time of suffering. It's the last one I'll eat until we all eat it together in the coming reign of God." Taking the cup, Jesus blessed it, then said, "Take this and pass it among you. As for me, I'll not drink wine again until the commonwealth of God arrives." Taking bread, he blessed it, broke it, and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body given for you. Eat it in my memory." He did the same with the cup after supper, saying, "This cup is the new covenant written in my blood, poured out for you." Within minutes, the disciples were bickering over who of them would end up the greatest. But Jesus intervened. Kings like to throw their weight around, and people in authority like to give themselves fancy titles. It's not going to be that way with you. Let the senior among you become like the junior. Let the leader act the part of the servant. Who would you rather be, the one who eats dinner or the one who serves the dinner? You'd rather eat and be served, right? But I have taken my place among you as the one who serves. May God bless our hearing of the gospel. Well, I'm big on emotions. The Enneagram Type 4, which I am, tends to think of him or herself as fluent in emotions, feeling them intensely, going more readily to the deep, dark places than the average person. That's one of the ways we make good counselors. All the types could be a good counselor, but the fact that we're willing to go with someone into the darkest places of trauma, and yes, it's hard, but 4s tend to be courageous about it, not as much afraid of it. But in spite of all that, I've been learning that with all the strong emotions I've encountered, I don't know all the feeling words to express the wide variety of aspects of fear and sadness. So I can work with them. You have to name them before you can work with them. Otherwise, it's like a flood of emotion. You don't know what to do with it. It just overcomes you. So if you can't name and describe the emotions, how do you process them? Brene Brown is known to say that people can generally only name happy, afraid, sad, and angry. And sometimes only 3 of those. They don't name happy. They take that for granted. But yeah. That would be like trying to decorate a house with only primary colors. The idea that you only have 4 words for your emotions, like just primary colors, that would be hilarious. That would be, our houses would look like a 5-year-old had done all the decorating and all the planning. It's a good one. And unfortunately, with the Bible, we tend to want to process just the facts, like Dragnet, just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. Well, in the Bible, it's full of emotions as well. In fact, our lives are full of emotions. But our culture focuses way too much on reason, the intellect, and gives short shrift to emotions. It's too messy. Expressing emotions is considered soft, squishy, sometimes even feminine, as a negative word. Happy is fine. Happy is by far and away the best. We all want to be happy. And angry is necessary because frustration is big when things don't go our way. During the height of the pandemic, people did not express fear, although they might have felt it. Instead, anger was the go-to emotion. How often did we see that during the height of the pandemic? Anger is actually secondary. When you're afraid, it's safer to go to anger than to express the vulnerability of fear. So again, if we can learn to work with our emotions, much better. Now, sadness, take that. It's okay if you keep it quiet. Don't cry. Don't show the sadness too much. And after the death of a loved one, people are expected to get back to work in a fairly short amount of time. You get 3 days, 4 days for the funeral to make arrangements, all of that. And then you're expected to be somewhat back to normal, certainly by the end of 6 weeks. And often people won't talk about your loved one after 6 weeks. They're afraid it will bring up pain, as if the pain went away. No, it didn't. So, yeah. And when is fear okay? So sadness is generally not okay. Mild sadness, okay. But when is fear okay? Unfortunately, yeah, we need to deal with fear and sadness, and we have both of those in abundance when Jesus meets with his disciples at what he knows will be the end of this life for him. The disciples don't know it yet. So imagine Jesus's emotions. He's filled with dread, which is a part of fear. He's filled with sadness because there's so much more to do. There's so much more to teach, so much more to heal. And the disciples, like I said, don't know that it's the end. They think that push is coming to shove with the authorities and that Jesus will throw the bums out. And so he passes the unleavened bread, which is what they would have had. And he said, share this together, break it apart, and everyone have some. Think of it as my body broken. We hear the words of communion and we don't really hear them anymore. Jesus explains, I will be broken, not in a symbolic way, but really and truly broken. I will be hurting, I'll be abused and killed. Jesus might have said, for those who stay near me in my suffering, near my broken body, it will take courage to witness such brokenness. It will break your heart, and we will be weeping. During and right after 9/11, people were emotional. One evening I was standing in Target store near the pharmacy, and the pharmacist explained that they couldn't fill a prescription that I needed, and because there was an error, and it couldn't be done until it was straightened out. And of course, living in rural areas, I'd driven half an hour to the Target, had to drive half an hour home, and the next day I knew I would have to drive all that way again to get it filled. And that night, that evening, I just burst into tears. I just was tired. I was ill. I needed the prescription. I wanted to start it. And you know what? A complete stranger, a woman, came over to me and she said, can I help in some ways? In some way. And I cried harder because she was so compassionate and so sensitive. And I said, no, there's nothing that can be done. And I was very discouraged. Yeah, it's tough. I remember after 9/11, people stood in line to give blood. There was such an outpouring of compassion after a national tragedy, and we really all felt closer to one another. It would have been nice to keep that for longer than we did. I almost wonder, why are people in such a hurry to leave the pandemic behind? There's a rush to return to normal, which means everyone looks out for themselves and their own household with less concern for the common good. And we return to the pre-pandemic normal of not having patience, not allowing room for difficult emotions. Growing up, my parents had a saying, and I don't remember exactly. I think there was some part of it that was like, devil take the hindmost. And I remember part of it was, let the hind end drag. or at least I think. And I think I asked my mom, and she said it has to do with people who have their resources and take care of themselves and their own. But those others, so sad for them, but they don't have what I have, and so not my problem. And that's what I remember about it. Jesus tenderly tells of the brokenness, and not long after that, the disciples are arguing about who will be the greatest among them as they wield power. They've missed it completely. Jesus says, in the world, those with fancy titles like to throw their weight around. It's not going to be that way with you. Those who are leaders will serve, and those who are junior will be honored. Those who are least honorable will be honored. It's not the way the world works. And then he asks, would you rather be the one who sits and eats dinner or the one who serves? And Jesus said, I'm among you as one who serves. A completely opposite way of how the world does things. In the church, we tend to avoid humility. I know Pope Francis was one who has been known for washing feet of the least, the last, and the lost, or the outcast. And I think in churches, we shy away from foot washing in the church because why? Think about that. Why do we shy away? We don't want the humility of ugly feet being washed, of someone holding our feet tenderly. I've done services like that, and it was an amazing experience, both to receive and to give. And yet, I don't know, I think church people might be too proud. They like the polished idea that I'm put together, and I appear put together for other people, and my humility doesn't show. But we're all broken failures in some ways. Addicts in the 12 steps get this, whereas church people tend not to get it as much. And so we might want to avoid both the vulnerability and the intimacy of being bound together in our fears, in our failures, in our forgiveness, in our offering and receiving forgiveness. We'll do it for others sometimes, but we don't want it done for us. We don't want to owe anybody. That's how we think of it. Jesus didn't see it that way. Jesus takes his place among us as one who serves. It's a model for how we do it. We're needy, and we accept this gift from Jesus. So if we can't show the neediness with one another, how can we see it in ourselves as receiving from Christ? As much as we're aware of it in ourselves, then we can be aware of ourselves receiving it from Christ. There is emotion in it because we're vulnerable, broken failures, receiving the gift of grace. How can grace mean anything if we're not aware of our failures? If we're not aware of our humility, if we're not aware of our need? So we tend to want to shine ourselves up, make ourselves presentable, at least on the outside. And we can thank God that we're not like those poor sinners, but we are. We are those poor sinners. And Jesus meets us at table and gives grace and love to us. May we give it to one another. Amen.